Attention, please. We're about to start our program of this evening. Please welcome the very well-known and the very well-traveled Martha Ann Canary.
I am so happy to be here tonight, and I am even more pleased to getting paid for it. But I need to make one little correction. I got the name Martha Ann Canary from my parents and precious little else. And I go by Calamity Jane. And if you want to be real formal, you could call me Mrs. Burke. Now, don't be rolling those eyes at me. It was a legitimate marriage, though I'm not sure where he is now. People always ask me how I got that name. Well, there's a lot of silly stories. Somebody wrote that I rescued a lieutenant out on the plains at full throttle on a horse, and he said, I W Calamity Jane, heroine of the plains. But that's too big a lie even for me. Nope, I was called Jane because the fella I had taken up with was already married to a Martha, and he didn't want to get confused. And Calamity, well, Calamity seems to follow me wherever I go. So that's the name. It's gotten me a lot of free drinks. I don't mind it at all. And that's what you can call me. So I was real pleased to see how up and coming Deadwood is. You got a new macadam road. You got big buildings, 3 stories tall. You got a courthouse. I mean, you were really coming along. When I look out at you, I wonder if any of you were in the scissors brigade that came once when I was here. No. Maybe your grannies or your mothers. I was in a bar drinking, just minding my own business. And this little group of old biddies came in with their scissors. And they said that since I wore men's clothes, I didn't deserve to have long hair, and they were fixing to cut it. Now, all the men in the bar just sort of stood back. Nobody was going to lay a hand on a woman. So I had to boot them out of there all by myself. And if you know any of them, tell them I still have one of their pairs of scissors and I don't intend to give it back. So I see you have a nice new courthouse too. And I guess there's some real stable and ordinary justice being dished out to anybody who's cutting up. I remember a time, long time ago, there was this fellow named Slippery Sam. And he had this gorgeous overcoat, and it was real cold. This coat was striped every color of the rainbow. It was like Joseph's. And he had been given the bartender at the Bella Union a hard time. And the bartender said if he came back, he was going to shoot him. Well, Sam went right out and he loaned that beautiful coat to Bummer Dan, who was shivering on the street corner with none. And poor Dan walked right into the Bella Union, and the bartender picked up his rifle and he shot him dead. But the court let him off because he wasn't aiming for that person, and it wasn't the man he meant to kill. So that was the kind of justice we used to have. So the people who invited me have very kindly collected the questions in this cigar box. Maybe you all were too shy to ask. So now the first one says, are you going to have another party? I don't think so, but that was quite a party. I came back some years ago. I hadn't been in Deadwood in a long time, and I had this little girl with me. And I know I told people she was my daughter, but I don't think many people believed me. She was the daughter of a friend of mine who had died. And I had the idea that we would have a benefit party for her, like we did Charlie Hanks when his water turned black. And we would raise money and send her off to school. So we got the Green Front Saloon. You don't see it anymore because it burned down. It was like the worst of the worst saloons. And they got a hold of some green paint, but only enough to paint the front. And they were the only ones who would close down to their regular customers for the entire evening. And we printed up tickets and everybody bought one. Even people who never would have been caught dead in a saloon. They all bought tickets. And we had not one, but 2 piano players. And when one of them would get drunk and start playing real sad songs like "Whisper Softly, Mother's Dying, Loving Eyes Begin to Close," well, we'd shove him off the stool and put the fresh one on, who would play lively songs like Camptown Races. We had a long chorus line, all men. They put their arms on each other's shoulders and they all danced out into the street and gave a little kick. And then they pivoted on one heel and they danced back in. It was like they had practiced all night. It was a great party. Dora Dufran from the other saloon came, and her fancy ladies, and they danced with all the men. And they got a lot of money, and they got it away from me before I could treat everybody in the world to drinks. We had enough money to send that little girl probably clean through college. We sent her off to St. Martin's, which is a good school. It's run by the nuns. She was real sad to go, though. She wanted to stay with me. And I had to tell her that I was going through a good spell, but that I knew it wasn't going to last, and she needed to go off to school. She wrote me letters for a long time. She might still be, but they're just not reaching me anymore. She was a real nice little girl. Now I hear a little whispering from you all that wasn't there a real daughter? Well, yeah, there was a real daughter. I had a baby, a little girl, and by the time I noticed what was happening to me, it was too late to do anything about it, and the father had long since run off. So Dora Dufran, who, whatever people say about her, she was a good friend to me. She took me in and she let me live in a room at her saloon. And when all the other fancy ladies found out I was pregnant, they started getting me glasses of milk every day, and they'd sit there so pleased they'd found me all this milk, and they'd watch as I drank that thick white stuff. I don't know where they found all that milk. So when the baby was born and she was real small, and people would say, that's because you weren't eating right. That wasn't true. I drank glass after glass of that milk. Now, the ladies would love to pick her up, and they'd carry her around and they'd pat her on their shoulders, but they kept bringing her back. Every time I'd be sitting down to have a drink or a chat with somebody, here would come the baby wanting a feed. And they took to making little bonnets for her, little crocheted caps, and they traded patterns. And my daughter had enough little crocheted bonnets to wear for 2 weeks with no repeats. And then she got sick. When I took her to the doctor, he said that was just not a fit environment to raise a baby in. So Dora was about ready for us to leave anyway, because having everybody cooing over the baby and crocheting little bonnets, it really wasn't the atmosphere that her customers were hoping for when they came in. So the baby and I got a little room, a shack really. And then the winter came, and it was so cold, and people kind of forgot we were out there. I remember I had to force open the door against a huge bunch of snow and take the baby back to the doctor. And he had mentioned that he might know a family who would take her in, a husband and a wife, and they'd lost a baby a long time ago, and the wife had never recovered. So I told him to contact him, that I was ready to do that. It was a good thing for her. She learned to play the piano, and she went to school. And the mother was never up to much, but the father, he was a really good man. I used to stand sort of down the block and watch her playing in the yard, but she didn't want to see me after a while. I can understand that. But she can't deny me, because she looks just like me, except her eyes are just a little bit crossed. She's also a crack shot, just like me. Her father would take her out rabbit hunting. She would hit it every time. Because I've always, ever since I picked up a gun, I've been a terrific shot. And I'm not bad with a bullwhip either. I used to drive those long oxen, those 22 oxen, back before the train came. And I could take that whip and I could flick the ear of the furthest one up to get them moving. I flicked the hat off one of the other drivers too. He was beating on those poor tired beasts, and I took his hat off with my whip, and I told him that the next time it was going to be his ear. He didn't even frown at those animals after that. Of course, those trains don't come through anymore, because now you got the real train coming through, blowing its whistle, and things are better. Yeah. So let's see. That was my daughter. So here is one. It says, can you tell us about Buffalo Bill Hickok? Now, ladies, it's not that long ago. It's Buffalo Bill Cody, and Wild Bill Hickok. I mean, Cody's still alive. You must have seen his face. He plasters it every time his show comes through. He plasters those posters on every flat surface in town. With the mustache and the beautiful blonde, white hair flowing down. He is the one who had the show, and he used to be a buffalo hunter, but he's reformed. And he's keeping the Wild West alive. Some people say he's embalming the Wild West. And Wild Bill Hickok, well, he was the love of my life. And his name's not even Bill, it's James Butler Hickok. Nobody knows where that Bill came from. I remember a time when Wild Bill and Charlie Utter and I were riding into Deadwood. We had on matching fringe jackets. We had enough fringe to make rope. And in my mind, we were riding 3 white horses, but I'm not sure that's true. And there was Bill with his blonde, long curls. And there was Charlie, who was no slouch, who had black, long curls, and kind of hurt my feelings because I was the plainest one of the bunch. That was a long time ago. And then Wild Bill got shot in the back by Jack McCall. And I've told the story that I chased Jack McCall down the street with a meat cleaver, but that's not true. I wasn't even in town. Bill was playing poker, and Jack McCall said that he had shot his brother. Well, you know, Bill was a marshal. He shot lots of people. He was holding aces and eights, black eights and black aces. And ever since, that's been an unlucky hand. It's called a dead man's hand. And I came back. I think I was in lead at the time. And I came back, and there was a nice funeral for Bill. They had to set a guard on his body because everybody was coming by and trying to take a curl as a souvenir. If I could have got close to it, I would have taken one. And I told his friends that I wanted to be buried next to Bill. And they just laughed at me. Some of them were such snakes. They said, no way is Bill going to lie for eternity next to someone like you. Bill washed his hair and took a bath every day. And there's no way he'd have anything to do with you. But I am making a plan. On my deathbed, I'm practicing. I'm going to practice my last words. I'm going to say, bury me next to Bill. And who's going to deny a woman her last request? No, they'll put me there, I know, regardless of what those friends of his said. Anyway, so that's Wild Bill Hickok and Buffalo Bill Cody. Let's see what else we got in here. Did you ever rob a stage? No, I never robbed a stage. The only thing I remember robbing was once the general store. I had gone up to a cabin full of miners who had mountain fever. And they were all sick and throwing up all over the place. And there was not a speck of food in that house. And I searched and I looked for nuggets or a little gold dust, and I couldn't find a thing. So I went down to the store and I collected everything, and he put it in a nice box for me. And the storekeeper tallied up the bill. And when he handed it to me, I laid my 6-gun on the counter and I said, those boys need this food and they'll come down and pay you when they're better. And I hope they did. And I went up and I nursed them, and they pulled through and they ate all this food, and maybe one of them died, but the rest of them were okay. And that's the only robbery that I can recall doing. So let's see. Was you an only child? Ladies, you need to watch your grammar. I mean, I hardly had any schooling, but the subject and the verb, they got to agree. I was not an only child. When my mother and father came out of Missouri, and there were 6 children, and I was the oldest. And I don't know where they are now. I know where Lena is, but she got religion and she got so upright, she didn't want to see me anymore. But I wish I knew where that little Charlie was. I mean, he was the baby. I practically raised him. But my parents kind of gave up, and then they died one after the other. And they put the little ones into foster care, and they wanted to put me, but I was 16. And I thought, no. They just want an extra pair of hands. They want me to take care of the little children. So I lit out. I just wasn't going to do that. It's worked out okay. I mean, I wish I had kept in touch maybe, but that's the way it goes sometimes. And here, were you an Indian scout? Well, no, not really. I mean, I got on real well with the Indians, though I did go out once with General Crook. And I went out with the soldiers and my clothes got wet. And so various of the men lent me pieces of the uniform. So we were standing around and word came that Crook was going to do an inspection. So I stood up real straight. And when he came by and saluted, I gave him a snappy salute. And all the men began to laugh. And when he wanted to know, when he yelled and screamed, "What are you laughing at?" they pointed out that he had just saluted Calamity Jane. Well, he was a real bastard to the Indians, but he also had no sense of humor, and he sent me right back to town. It was a real disappointment. But no, I was never an Indian scout. And that's none of your business. You people. So we talked about the party and we talked a little bit about Buffalo Bill. He was a good friend to me. He had his big show and he let me be in it for a while as long as I wasn't drinking too much. And sometimes I could do that because I was a good shot. I rode a horse real well. I couldn't really keep it up though. But I did. This other lady came and contacted me because, you know, by then I was famous. There was this man back east and he would write what they call dime novels. And he wrote about me and Wild Bill. And he called me Calamity Jane, heroine of Whoop Up. Did you ever hear anything so silly? And he had me pictured with long, flowing red hair and a little waist about this big and a really big bosom. And I would go and rescue people on horseback and all kind of wild stories. But I got sort of famous. And people would come to town and they'd want to meet me like I was an attraction. And they would buy me drinks and I would tell them whatever story came into my head. And this woman arranged for me to go on a dime novel tour. So I went to Chicago and then I went to the World's Fair, which was in Buffalo. It's where McKinley got shot. And I wasn't exactly in the fair. I was like on a midway next to it. And there was a little show when I would do some trick riding. I had a horse back then that when I would take a bow, he would take a bow. It was the funniest thing. And I'd do a little shooting and they'd reenact a stagecoach rescue and there'd be this girl screaming out the window and I would go rescue her from the stage. That worked for a little while. And then the lady printed up a little tiny book about my life and I could sell that for $0.25. Do I see anybody back there with a camera? Because I want to tell you, if you want to take my picture, you got to pay a sitting fee. I used to let everybody take my picture and I'd be hungry and thirsty and me and mine would not have enough and they'd be making money off of my picture. So now I charge a sitting fee. So if you want to take a picture with that camera, you have to pay me $1. And if you want me to go get my gun, it's $1.25. But the Great World's Fair, it was wonderful. There were electric lights all over. That whole midway was lit up. And once they shot McKinley, the anarchist who shot him was tackled and held down by this great big African-American man. And he was smiling and happy. And afterwards, he sold the buttons off of his coat for $25 a piece. He made a fortune. But that didn't last long for me. And I was having a bad spell. And Cody put up the money for me to take a train back west. He was real kind. Let's see what else we got in here. Are you friends with Annie Oakley? Well, not exactly. I mean, she was in Bill's show and I seen her. I don't think we ever had a conversation. And she's a better shot than I am. That's the truth. She can hit the edge of a playing card. She had her husband once too. I heard that was pretty funny. But she's real prissy. I mean, she's got all those petticoats and she's got a little tiny waist and a pretty hat. I think she wears wigs. So no, we're not she's not my type. We're not really friends. That's kind of a sad thing. Mostly, I've hung around with men because they kind of understand me and they don't mind what I look like. And it's worked out pretty well for me. I just got to get myself buried next to Wild Bill. They put up a little fence around his monument in Deadwood because people were coming and chipping off little pieces. So they had to put it out far enough that you couldn't reach in and chip off a little piece of. I just can't understand some people. It was a big funeral. It was really nice. They sent him off really well. A lot of crying, a lot of everybody coming from all over, all these little towns. Newspaper covered it. All the newspapers came and covered it. Used to be when I would ride into a town on a slow day, the newspaper editors would be so happy to see me. They'd say, Calamity Jane, you're here. I can put it on the front page. And sometimes they put it on the front page when I wasn't even in town. And there'd be two towns 100 miles apart. And they both say, Calamity Jane came back to town. Calamity Jane came back to town. It was absurd. But as I said, got me a lot of free drinks. I can't complain about that. I got some regrets. Yeah, I got some regrets. But I did a little bit. I did a little bit of nursing of patients with smallpox because I'd already had it and I wasn't going to get it again. And there was a sweet family. But the little girl did not make it, and that was really hard. But the boy and the parents both recovered. So that was a good thing. I remember carrying that little body wrapped in her blanket. We kind of had to put him outside the cabin. I don't know who took it away eventually. Maybe somebody from the church did. But that was a sad thing. There was a lot of illness. We had some good doctors, but we never had enough. We just never did. Well, I'm getting a little dry, and this water's really not doing it. But I thought if any of you guys had some questions that you would like to ask me, I could try to answer them before I go.
If anybody has any questions for Miss Calamity Jane, would you like to throw them in the chat, or we could actually bring you all up here to the gallery view? Did you want to unmute, Janice?
And you can actually raise your hand if you want to ask a question.
Yes, that's true, because we can see
That's
you.
the polite way to do it. Yeah. I like to see your faces and all those nice little hats. Isn't this a great hat? It's almost brand new. I borrowed it particular to wear it for you all. The owner doesn't know I borrowed it, but I'm going to give it back later. Yeah. But it's a real nice hat, I think.
I have some pictures if you want to explain them. Miss Calamity Jane, shall I bring up these pictures and you can explain them? All right, great. Share screen. Share. All right.
Oh, cool.
Oh.
Well, that's me. And that's Bill's grave. And there was a photographer in town and he asked what I wanted as a backdrop. So I struck up a pose right outside of Bill's grave, where with any luck, I'll be buried right next to him. But yeah, that's what that one is. And that's me in my hunting. And you see, I have my gun with me, and that's me when I went out hunting and help people, going with the cavalry for long distances. So that was not quite as good as the jacket that Bill and me and Charlie Utter had, but that was a good old coat. I don't know what happened to it. And that's my horse. That was the best horse. His name was Satan because he was black. He was a smart animal. I kind of lost him I think it was probably a poker game, but He was the best horse I ever had. He really was. I went to visit the little girl at St. Martin's, and somebody had to bring me in a wagon because I had lost my horse, though I still had the saddle. And those nuns were so nice. They invited me in for tea, but it was really nice. And I sat around with the little girls, and they were very curious, and they had lots of questions. And I had a real nice visit with them, and it was good to see what the money had gone for. That she was in this beautiful school with a big wall around it and a garden, and she was learning to play the piano too. Yeah, that was a nice little visit. And then
Miss Angela Lloyd would like to know, how did you get to the World's Fair?
I went on the train. It was a
Mhm.
long train ride, but there was a lot to see out the windows. I mean, I had never been east. I'd never been across the Mississippi River. We went all the way to Buffalo, and I didn't have a place to lie down, but the chairs weren't too bad, the seats. Then when I got there, I had to find my way to wherever I was supposed to go, because I had the address of the person who had hired me to be in his little show. And he was pretty fair. He got tired of me before I got tired of it, but yeah, it was all in all. And then I got back, I got my ticket from Cody, and got back west.
Miss Megan Hicks is curious about that mug you're drinking from. Is that Calamity ware?
No, it's just a nice blue willow pattern that one of the ladies here provided me with to have a little drink. Coffee, not that interesting a drink, but they were very kindly gave this to me.
Miss Sarah Armstrong popped in a little bit late and was wondering if you talked about how you got your name.
I did. I could recap that.
Mhm.
I had taken up with a fella, and he already had a wife named Martha. And he didn't want to get confused between the two of us, and so he just picked Jane. And then when people started calling me Calamity Jane, which is a little unfair, because I mean, sometimes I helped out in a calamity, but I don't think that's what they meant. And I never, man, I didn't often shoot up a saloon. So anyway, but Calamity Jane just stuck, and now I kind of like it. So that I keep it.
Thank you. Miss Mindy Neo is wondering what advice you might give to your younger self.
I've lived a kind of a rough life, and I guess I would tell my younger self to settle down and work at something steady. You know, I drove those oxen, and I rode a few cattle drives, and there was a whole winter when I cooked for a band of outlaws up in the hills, and I charged them $5 a pie. But it was hard, you know. I had to scrabble around, and sometimes I didn't have enough to eat, and frequently I didn't have any place to sleep. I lost my horse, lost another horse. So I would tell my younger self to think harder about the choices you make. But you can't go back. You just got to go forward. So I've had a pretty good time.
Some folks talk about you as a dance hall girl. Can you talk a little more about that?
Do I look like a dance hall girl? Even when I was young, I did not look like a dance hall girl. I'm taller than most. I'm broader than most. I seem to stomp around rather than dance in little feet. I mean, I have danced occasionally, but I am not anybody's first choice of a partner. I've been friends with some dance hall girls and worse, and they usually have hearts of gold, but I never really was one of them. I have occasionally had to do jobs and to do things to support myself that I'm not proud of. And a lot of water is going under the bridge, and a lot of not water is going under the bridge. And, but, you know, I am still here. And now I seem to be kind of a symbol of the Wild West, which is a strange thing to be while you are still kicking.
Is there anything that you still want to do, Calamity Jane? If you could.
I've enjoyed being back in Deadwood, and I've enjoyed seeing the old 76ers, who are the people who came for the 1876 gold rush, and sitting around and talking to them and talking to people who remember the same things I remember. And that's been really nice. And there's a few other people that I would like to get a chance to sit down and have a drink with still. Yeah. And if Bill could come back, Wild Bill, then that would be wonderful, but he's not. So, yeah, that here we are, you know. I would like to have a little more money, and if I get some more sitting fees for my photographs, or if you guys want to go to the back of the room after this talk is over, my autobiography is on sale for 25 cents, and you can buy yourself your own little copy and read all about it.
Did your daughter get back in touch with you?
No, she doesn't really want to acknowledge me. I mean, people kind of know she's my daughter, but she's gone on, she's married, she's, you know, she has a really pretty baby that I've seen, you know, from a distance. That's also, if you talked about regrets, that's a regret. But I am happy that she got a good life, and that she got an upstanding life, and she got some education, and it's a good thing to see that she is off on a road where she won't end up like me, where she'll always have people around her. And that's a good thing. So no, she doesn't. She's got, as far as she's concerned, you know, she has a father, and I think the adopted mother died. But yeah, she's okay.
One of our auxiliary members is curious about women's rights, about how opportunities have progressed from your early days. Were there any instances where you felt like you were discriminated, and any opportunities you missed because of your gender?
You know, I never let my gender get in the way. I kind of just lived the way I wanted to live, and I wore the clothes I wanted to wear. And I'm all for women's suffrage. I mean, that's a great thing. And someday women will have the vote, and that'll be really good. In fact, I think in one state somewhere they may already be voting, but I always felt like you can't wait for somebody to give you something. And if you don't have something you need, you got to go and find a way to get it, and take it if you have to. But not everybody's like that. And I think if you were some sweet and soft young thing, you may need to get a little backbone so you can stand up for yourself. So I don't know too much more about that.
Is there somebody that you look up to, Calamity Jane, and who would that be and why?
Well, you know, Buffalo Bill's always been such a good friend, and he's doing a lot. He killed a lot of Indians. He certainly killed a lot of buffalo, but he's kind of sorry for that now, and I like what he's doing. He's a good man. And Dora Dufran, I mean, you can talk about her all you like, and you can talk how you don't like women who live like that, but she is the kindest person you ever want to see. I mean, she gives money to people. She helps girls who are down on their luck. When one of her girls gets sick, she doesn't put them out. She pays for them to go to the doctor. Yeah, she's a good person. So I do look up to her. People go, oh, Dora Dufran, but no, despite her line of work, yeah, she is a good person. Mm. And I don't look up to Annie Oakley. I maybe shouldn't be so mean about her, but no.
Oh, do tell us more about that.
Well, she is such a feminine little thing. She's just all fluff, and besides being a really good shot, she can ride a horse, but she kind of, I don't know, she's everything sort of I'm not. And maybe these are green eyes coming out that I feel jealous of Annie Oakley. I don't know. But she's not high on my list. No.
Are there any more questions that we might have for Calamity Jane before we
Okay, close.
have her take off her hat and
Go for that. Okay.
join us as
Happily. Whew.
herself?
We'll be able to see again. Yay.
Hi, Jane.
Right. So I did want to tell a little bit about Calamity Jane. When I mentioned her deathbed words, those really were her deathbed words, and they were not able to deny them. His friends who had put up money for that monument, they were furious. But she's buried, she's outside the fence, but she's buried next to Bill, you know, and it's wonderful. And nobody has forgotten her. She died in 1903. So she came west probably in a covered wagon, and you know, she saw the trains and electric lights, and she had a full life. And she's not exactly infamous. I mean, she's not a role model for your daughter in most ways, but in the way of sticking up for herself and doing what she wants regardless. She kind of is. And I don't think she'll be forgotten. So.
What got you started?
Well, partially the name, but you know, I started reading about Calamity Jane, and I think I have like the world's class collection of books on her. And I started trying to tease out what's true and what's not true. Like there's a little book called Calamity Jane's Letters to Her Daughter, which is almost certainly made up. It's a nice read. And there's a little incident in there where supposedly these are a bundle of letters that Calamity Jane, essentially homeless and drunk most of the time, managed to carry around for 20 years. And then like in the 20s, a woman came forward and was on the radio, and she said she was the daughter of Calamity Jane and Wild Bill Hickok. So some people looked at her and she said, you know, you're not old enough to have been Wild Bill's daughter. But she supposedly had a marriage certificate. Jane and Bill had been riding across the plains, and they met a minister, and he married them, and he made a marriage certificate on a page torn out of a Bible. So then you read a little more about this, and you see that that same minister had married Wild Bill Hickok to somebody else 6 weeks before. And you really think he might have remembered Wild Bill. So it's little things like that, and finding the little nuggets of real truth, like the incident with General Crook. That's in a letter that one of the soldiers wrote home to his family saying, essentially, guess what happened today? General Crook saluted Calamity Jane. So that's a little, you know, it's neat to find these little things that are undeniably true. Yeah, amid all this other stuff. So that kind of got me started in researching her. And I love the story. I like Cody. I don't like Wild Bill. I don't think he was a nice man. He certainly wasn't that nice to Jane. He was pretty much a cold-blooded killer who got a famous name. With a beautiful mustache and long blonde hair, and he washed his hair every day. Yeah, but I don't think he deserves the fame that he has.
But she loved him.
She adored him. Yeah, yeah. She was married several times to other people, possibly concurrently, but she said, if anybody had asked about my wedding ring, I'd say, well, yeah, that's one of them. But she just adored Bill. And I don't find anything that suggests it was more than an admiration from afar. There might have been. She did support herself in various ways, but yeah.
So you don't think there was a relationship between them?
I have nothing to go on to think that there was a relationship other than Jane and then his friend saying he wouldn't have touched her. You know, she's dirty, she smells. He wouldn't have touched her with a 10-foot pole. In fact, I think they said exactly that. So, I mean, they may have been at some, you know, quiet night on the prairie, but there's not even anything to think that they were alone together that much. So there's just not enough to go on. There's a lot of even like her birth date. Some people she writes in one place 1852. There's somebody else who says I saw them come into town in 1847. So there's a lot that people just didn't have very organized lives, some people, and there's not a paper trail, and the newspapers all burned down because Deadwood burned to the ground several times. So there's it gives me a little liberty, but yeah, there's not a lot of facts.
May I
Yes,
ask
Margaret.
another question?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jane, this is Margaret. So, I'm still curious about what really intrigued you about telling this story. Because when I get attracted to a character, I want to tell their story, there's some identification I usually feel with that
There is
character.
certainly
So,
some identification. I just loved it. I sometimes feel like I'm channeling Jane.
huh.
That bit about Annie Oakley, the last time I did this, somebody asked, did she know Annie Oakley? And I couldn't have told you that Jane hated Annie Oakley, but she did. It just came out of somewhere, which is a very odd feeling. So I think the fact that she lived her own life, she wore pants, she didn't conform to the norms of her time. I mean, there are some pictures of her in skirts and occasionally a little silly hat, but she did what she needed to do to support herself and in her own way. So that kind of appeals.
I really
Angela, you
appreciate
were
hearing the story. I didn't know the story of Calamity Jane, only the name. So,
yeah.
Some people say that they don't even know she was real. They think she was, a character like from one of the dime novels. Yeah, but she definitely was. And
Very
there's a lot of photographs. She loved having her picture taken. And she did start charging people for it, but there's, she holds the gun, she had a good time with that.
Angela was wondering whether you'd had a chance to take this out to a Chautauqua yet, or if that was sort of in your future to aim for the Chautauquas.
It would be a wonderful place to tell. I don't know whether I have enough hard facts for Chautauqua. I mean, I've got to go between little incidents in her life and then kind of think what might have happened in those other times.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's clear she had a baby, but like the little bonnets, who knows? I like that incident, but that's made up. So I don't know how picky the Chautauqua things are. I would like to tell in some other places. But I don't know about that one.
Anything else? Other questions?
well. I just love her.
Yeah, good. Me too.
I just love her. I'm just, I had no idea, and so it's wonderful to have that knowledge now.
And you sure like her better than Annie Oakley, I'm sure. Yeah.
my only knowledge of Annie Oakley is from Annie Get Your Gun, which I know is not like reality by any stretch of the imagination.
By any stretch,
She
right?
did wing her husband once. It's kind of funny, I think. Jane, there've been a bunch of movies about Calamity Jane. Doris Day played her.
That's right. I remember that.
Yeah, I mean, there have been some awful. Jean Arthur, I think it was too bad. There was one with Angelica Houston, who physically
That's a
looked
better
like-
casting.
She was much better casting. She's not gorgeous woman. She's tall. She really looked a lot more like Jane.
But I vaguely remember the Doris Day one, and they like dressed her up at the end, didn't they?
I'm sure they did. And she wore
I'm
pigtails. I mean,
I'm sure they
she
decided
gave
that
up on her
they
wild way.
stemmed her up in a big way.
Yes, they did.
I just wanted, it's Kristen, I just wanted to chime in and echo what Janice said about, I have such a deeper appreciation for Calamity Jane now. I had no idea what a badass she was. And then when you really, truly, when you're talking about all of the many ways she stood up for herself, I had no idea. And her creativity and making, hustling it and finding ways to
Yeah.
make a dime here and there. Wow.
It's
At
not
a
easy.
time when that was hard,
It was
especially
hard.
for a woman.
Yeah, I mean, she was a laundress. She may have worked as a prostitute. She just really had to scramble without having a man
Yeah.
to support her.
Yeah.
Trade.
And you said about, how she didn't conform. She lived the way she I think that's amazing,
Yeah,
especially at that time that
Not an easy thing
she
to
didn't give
do.
into that. Not easy at all to do,
yeah.
especially then. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You know,
Yeah, it sort of,
she
it
lived
sort
in
of
old
pushes the
bones.
issues around morality, right? Doesn't it sort of push the issues around morality? What
It does, and she was an
kind of
alcoholic.
opportunities people have and the kind of choices that they have to make, survival choices they have to make. And
Yeah, and if she hadn't, drunk so much, she would have lived longer, I'm sure. But
I'm thinking that drinking, when you mentioned her childhood, how traumatic. She had a ton of traumatic experiences, and I'm imagining,
lost both parents
alcohol at
by the
that time.
time. Yeah, by the time she was 16, they were both dead. Um,
Mm.
and I think they had so little supervision. There is some probably firsthand accounts about the family and about them begging. The big girl and the little ones going door to door begging. So I don't know whether that was before or after the parents died, but it was, clearly they didn't have any food and they had to go ask for some. So that's probably a pretty reliable fact, because some of these things
Yeah.
people either put in their journals or you know, they put in the newspapers, not very reliable. But there's one person who says, when somebody asked him years later if he knew Calamity Jane, he said, well, I remember when her funeral was, and if I'd known she was going to be this famous, I might have gone.
Ah,
It just wasn't that famous in her lifetime, at least not locally. But yeah, it was a hard life. I don't think it was unusually. I mean, it was a hard time. There was so much disease and killing, and
Yes.
you just
Yes.
can't think how different things were.
Yes.
So, yeah. Well, thank you. This has been great, Ladies Auxiliary, and I really appreciate you listening.
Well,
Appreciate
we're behind you. We wish you longevity with this piece. We
Thank
know that it's just going to deepen and grow for you.
really, it's
And
really amazing how much it
so,
has changed since the last time Megan and I heard it.
mhm, mhm.
Yeah, well, it had to
Really.
get a little longer to fill something.
Well, but it was great. The details that you picked were wonderful.
Yeah. Thank
So,
you. And I'm still reading about her. I mean, some people wrote books and they just love Calamity Jane. Other people wrote the books and they seem to hate her. And even when
Mm.
she did nice things like nursing somebody back from illness, they said, oh, she just wanted attention. So
Yeah.
I don't know why they
I
bothered to
think
write
that's
her.
that moral thing.
well,
It's that moral
yeah,
thing. A lot of books are written to try to
Yeah,
work out the
she was, yeah,
moral positions.
yeah. There's one who said when she told people she was doing a book on Calamity Jane, they said, why would you want to write about her? You look like such a nice lady. How could you do that? Yeah.
well, and there was nobody to say no to any of those negative reports.
Oh,
I
they
mean,
just made up stuff, pulled
yeah,
out.
they just made things up, which was just,
Yeah.
and that she wasn't the only one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and truth, she made
Happened.
stuff up too, and she admits
Right.
that someplace.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
She never let the truth stand in the way of a good story. That
Of a
was
good story.
drink. Yeah, so
Mm.
there was a lot of that.
Mhm.
Excellent.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
for
you
coming and
again.
supporting our
It's
Jane,
been a lot
the
of fun.
Janes,
To
Jane.
yes. That's
We're working on our lineup for, we have 2 moons in August. So we'll be back
Right.
here August 30th for that second supermoon. And September, we have the Armstrong sisters, Jennifer and
Rebecca.
Rebecca Armstrong. And so we'll just kind of keep posting you as we go along. We're thinking about doing buttons, so don't be surprised if you hear from us asking for your address.
I love buttons.
Yeah, we can do some buttons.
Are you a moonbeam?
Are you a moonbeam?
I wanna be one. That sounds really cool. Do we get to wear jackets too? And will they be
Ooh,
bedazzled?
You can bedazzle it, baby.
Bedazzle away.
Yay!
Cool.
Well, it's very nice to see everyone.
Thank you again, Megan and Janice,
you at
for
the end of
bringing
the
us
month.
this.
Welcome.
Great
Thank you,
night.
Jane.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone. Thank you.
Recording will be out shortly.